negate and our sole contention concerns depriving Pakistan. Patel, William, and Mary quantifies that 50 million fewer Pakistanis live in poverty in 2011 than 1991. However, Patel furthers that an external shock to the economy could push millions back into absolute poverty. India's permanent membership wrecks the Pakistani economy in three ways. First is storming the Indus. According to Gumru of the Munich Institute in 2016, the Indus River system between India and Pakistan provides food and energy to 21 million Pakistanis. Fortunately, to hear the Daily Times in 2019 explains that despite its threat, India will never block Pakistan's water because it will result in a blow to their global image, compromising their aim to become a permanent member of the UN Security Council. Apart from removing a significant diplomatic obstacle, permanent membership will also allow India to control more water. Sawar of the ISSI in 2014 furthers that as a permanent member on the UNSC, India could ask to turn the line of control between the nations into an internationally recognized border, putting the starting points of all major Pakistani rivers under Indian control. The effect would be severe. Dinesh, a first post in 2016, writes that because 90% of Pakistan's agriculture is reliant on the Indus, even partial closure by India could result in famine and agrarian crisis. Waryak of Duke in 2018 concludes that just an unstable water supply could pose a significant threat to millions. Second is preventing a bailout. Currently, due to a debt crisis, the Asian Development Bank in 2019 writes that Pakistan's economy is set to grow at just 3.9% this year compared to 5.2% last year. As such, Run of the CSIS in 2018 writes, an IMF bailout is the only path for Pakistan to regain its macroeconomic stability. Granting India a permanent seat on the UNSC would dash hopes of IMF support, as India would have greater clout in economic institutions. Khan of the Naval Postgraduate School in 2015 writes that as a permanent member of the UNSC, India could use its influence on the International Monetary Fund to prevent Pakistan's access to loans, greatly weakening Pakistan's economy. In fact, Khan furthers that all permanent members in the UNSC are represented on various committees and financial institutions. Now more than ever, an IMF loan is key. While Hashmi of the Baria University in 2017 finds that the failure of the past IMF programs was due to Pakistan's lack of commitment to the reform process, with the current government, Karachi of The Economist in 2019 explains that the IMF deal will buy a couple more years for a sweeping reform that would help secure a new strategic direction for Pakistan. Without an IMF bailout, Ahmed of the CGD in 2018 writes that millions of Pakistanis will fall into poverty and suffer permanent damage to their living conditions. Third is incentivizing Pakistan to militarize. Habib of the New York Times in late 2018 explains that the Pakistani military has quietly reached out to India for peace talks. Habib furthers that these talks won't manifest until the Indian election is over. Even after the flare-up in February, Saeed of Reuters last month finds that Pakistan wants peace with India to focus on improving its healthcare and education. India on the UNSC reverses this progress. As Farouk of the World Times in 2015 explains that for Pakistan, India's permanent membership on the Council means receding to a strategic disadvantage against India, a scenario unacceptable to Pakistan. When India gains global influence, Pakistan responds by ramping up its military power. As Tellis of the Carnegie Endowment in 2017 observes, that the discord between India and Pakistan is fueled by the Pakistani army's desire to subvert India's ascendancy as a great power. Historically, Chacko of UPenn confirms that India's only success in setting the terms for Pakistani behavior from a position of superiority came in the aftermath of the 1971 war, which in turn triggered Pakistan's quest for a nuclear deterrent. Pakistani militarization entrenches poverty. As Sengupta of the Observer Research Foundation in 2019 writes that military escalation of tensions between India and Pakistan reduces bilateral trade, spooks foreign investment, and diverts government resources. Hussein of the National Defense University in 2013 quantifies that just a 1% increase in defense expenditure will increase poverty by 58% in Pakistan. That's when you gave.
Can I just see two cards? One, that they will militarize, and two, that militarization decreases FDI.
Cut cards are fine.
Yeah, of course.
Time starts now. Okay, that was 26 seconds.
This one right here is the other one. I think they're going to militarize. You asked for two, right?
Okay. Time starts back up now.
Nice.
Okay. In total, we've used 31 seconds of prep. Is everyone ready? Time will begin now. We affirm our sole contention is uniting the nations. Con 15 writes that the current UN Security Council no longer represents geopolitical realities, but is rather a reflection of powers from the end of World War II. UC Berkeley 14 finds that the lack of representation has created policy paralysis, leaving current UN policy ineffective at addressing global issues. India solves in two key ways. First, by shaping the agenda. Mirsh 06 explains that due to the lack of representation, developing countries are ignored in the Security Council, and action is often taken that unintentionally hurts them. India can reverse this. Given that they are not yet developed, Dago 14 writes that adding India will infuse the Council with a deeper understanding of issues regarding the developing world and enable a wiser response to world crises. Furthermore, India Express 07 reports that the African Union has been adamant in their support for Indian permanent membership. Overall, Dabahi 15 writes that India has historically been one of the most significant votaries on shaping UN agenda on behalf of the developing world. But second is through uniting the UN. Thayer 18 writes that the UN General Assembly is the most representative organ of the UN. Unfortunately, Sizuek 12 writes that the Assembly is not consulted by the Council. India changes this. As Dabahi 15 explains, that India has called for a greater relationship between the Council and Assembly through greater consistency and transparency, finding that the improved relationship will increase the credibility and representation on the Council. Overall, Grant 15 concludes that adding India would end the current trend of UN irrelevance. There are two key impacts, and first are peacekeepers. India improves UN peacekeepers in two key ways. First, through global donations. Windmark 11 writes that as the Security Council becomes less representative, member states aren't willing to contribute financially. Rapa 17 writes that since 2015, peacekeeping spending has declined 25% annually, causing missions in Africa to collapse. Fortunately, Herd 08 confirms that by legitimizing the Council, we would encourage more nations to contribute to peacekeeping. But second is through improving response time. Benson 18 concludes that UN peacekeepers are slow to deploy, taking 10 months to reach peak deployment. Fortunately, Ardwell 18 concludes that India wants to reform peacekeeping to improve response time to crises. Benson finds that this would be achieved through partnerships with local forces. Crucially, Benson concludes that delays in deployment allows conflicts to become entrenched, making long-term political solutions impossible. Peacekeeping is key. In the long term, Prince explains that peacekeeping helps nations build effective governing institutions, eliminating the root cause of violence. Thus, Sandler 17 writes that peacekeeping reduces the probability of war by 86%. Herd 18 furthers that if peacekeeping were to have higher spending, over 900,000 people would gain access to water and 1.4 million people would gain access to food. For example, the New York Times explains that in 2005, UN peacekeeping lifted the Congo out of being a failed state, allowing for the first election in 40 years and ending the war that killed 3.5 million people. The second impact is China. Parameter 10 finds that China's aggressive territorial claims on waters claimed by Vietnam, Malaysia, the Philippines, and Japan are spiking tensions in the region. Myers 18 furthers that Chinese military deployment has raised the cost of intervention too high for the United States, finding China is now capable of controlling all of the South China Sea. India contains China in two key ways. First, through UN mediation. Jaw 18 explains that the Security Council has historically served as an effective institution to solve bilateral disputes in South Asia. However, Grant 15 explains that the UN Security Council has lost its international legitimacy among emerging states because of its lack of representation. Thus, Jaw furthers that the Security Council can only effectively prevent conflict by expanding permanent membership. But second is through ending appeasement. Stunkel 10 explains that because it's a permanent member, China is a crucial barrier to India's bid for a permanent seat. Thus, he concludes that India is improving relations with China despite current disputes. Fortunately, Rising Power Project 17 explains that permanent seat on the Council would serve as an equalizer to China, ending the policy of appeasement and giving India leverage to expand its geopolitical clout. Overall, Tarpor 18 concludes that India would be an important counterbalance to China, denying China the ability to dominate the Indian Ocean and destabilize neighbors. However, Crampton concludes that it can only serve this role as a permanent member. Modorcus 17 furthers that China cannot secure its dominance on the South China Sea without the Indian Ocean because a blockade of the Strait of Malacca will cut them off of the Middle East and Africa's supplies. Conversely, Zizouek finds in January that China is significantly ramping up its military, indicating a prelude to war. Stout finds that China has historically expanded by invading regional actors such as Vietnam, where 50,000 people died. And Jaw concludes that these conflicts have the capability to cause extinction. It's because of all of these reasons that I'm very proud to affirm.
Is everybody ready?
Yes.
So the first thing you say in your case is that the UN is no longer representative of the whole world.
That's
so is your
correct.
whole case contingent on India representing the world through the voices of the fourth and the first link?
No, I would argue that we can have incremental increases of representation and still see our impacts trigger.
Like how much? Are you saying like some countries think the UN is more legitimate, so your impacts materialize?
No, it's the countries that India will be representing that will increase the legitimacy of the UN.
What countries are India representing?
I would argue the majority of the developing world, specifically the African
Can you give me
Union.
one example?
The African Union has specifically endorsed India's permanent seat
Well, a lot
because
of
they
countries
want.
in Africa-
Okay, can I answer your question?
Sure.
Africa has specifically endorsed India's seat by showing that the countries they represent as the whole multilateral institution will believe the UN is more representative. But you've asked multiple questions. I'm going to ask one. So let's talk about preventing a bailout. So you said that Pakistan has taken out multiple IMF loans in the past. What happened when they took out previous IMF loans?
They didn't follow what the IMF loan told them to do, so they failed.
And what implications did it have on their economy?
It messed up their economy because they didn't follow, they didn't commit to the IMF loan. The new evidence says the new Prime Minister Khan will commit to it. That's the evidence in our case.
Okay, so if it messed up their economy before, do you have any evidence indicating that that Pakistan in specific wants another IMF loan?
Yes, they're asking for it. That's why it almost happened last week and then it was delayed to mid-May.
Why was it delayed?
Because the Pakistani foreign minister had some issues.
Right, we're going to read you evidence saying that the Pakistani foreign minister specifically doesn't want an IMF loan, and if he was able to block it, okay, can I finish?
For IMF loans.
Okay, but if he was able to block it one time, what makes you think he won't be able?
He resigned because of a scandal. They just hired a new minister. That's what happened.
Okay, we'll look at that evidence after cross. Do you have a question?
Yeah. So, what evidence or what logic do you give that says that China cares about the legitimacy of the UN in terms of containing themselves, or in terms of other countries containing China?
Can you restate your question?
Why does China care about the UN legitimacy?
We're saying they don't care about the UN legitimacy right now, and that's why they're expanding in the South China Sea.
No, that's not what you're saying. You're saying that
I wrote
you're
my
saying,
text.
no, but my interpretation and the interpretation that you gave was that China cares about legitimacy, but they don't think it's legitimate enough right now to care about it.
Okay,
right?
so I can clarify your interpretation. The argument that we're making is that China right now doesn't feel like they are obligated to listen to the United Nations because it's not representative of everyone's views. That's why they've continued expanding into the South China Sea.
You're saying that China is taking over islands in the South China Sea because they don't think the UN Security Council is representative of the African Union?
Well, no. Of course they have interests of expanding economically, but I'm saying the disincentive of the UN isn't strong enough because it's not representative, it doesn't hold enough legitimacy.
If the UN becomes more representative, what changes in the decision-making calculus of Xi Jinping?
He decides that instead of just overstepping a institution that no one really respects, that maybe if he cares about his international reputation and image, that he should probably start listening to it and maybe start diplomatically trying to
So
expand.
your mechanism through which China is contained is that China now cares about its global image through international forums.
That's one of them, but they are also then disincentivized from a more legitimate UN. But that's cross.
I see that the finance minister was quit.
So you can read the title for sentence.
Okay, time will start. Okay, that was 26 seconds. In total, we've used 57 seconds.
Is everyone ready? Let's start at the top of their case when they say that there's currently a paralysis within the UN due to a lack of legitimacy.
We would say that policy paralysis is going to get worse if you affirm. The evidence comes from Gold 17, who explains that incremental expansions of the UN Security Council generate large efficiency losses for only small gains in legitimacy. The warning is pretty clear. If you add India to the permanent membership and they get a veto, or even if they don't, there's still way more gridlock just by adding one power. But there's not a huge increase in legitimacy just because India gets on the Security Council. So they're not actually linking in to the rest of their case. Then, their first warrant talks about shaping the agenda. They say that India has a deeper understanding of the conflict and will work to benefit the third world. Two responses. First, Popovsky 15 explains that there is a growing fear that India joining the Security Council will lead to the same things as the current P5 members and avoid actually advocating for the third world. The warrant here is pretty simple. When India is in the club of the elites, they begin to act more like the elites and they shun away the third world because they know that using them is not a way to get power in the international community, working with the P5 is. The second response comes from Burra 18, who explains that adding India to the permanent membership would only increase the current democratic deficit on the UN Security Council. The warrant here is essentially what's going on is when India joins, there's so many other countries who would oppose that, right? Africa would oppose just India getting on the Security Council because they want representation too. India, Indonesia, and Pakistan will say that India does not represent the Muslims of South Asia, which means on net, people are going to be mad at India joining. It's better to keep the status quo. The second thing they talk about here is unity. They say that there's going to be an increase in transparency because of India's reforms. But we would say that this is already happening in the status quo. As per Burma 17, 120 countries have pledged to increase transparency, efficiency, and accountability within the United Nations. Just because you add India does not mean this changes. We would say that looking at the status quo where the P5 is slowly agreeing to reforms gives you a 100% probability you get what they're talking about. Let's go to their impact. They talk about peacekeepers. The first thing they talk about is increasing global donations. But we would say at the point where the U.S. and the Trump administration is planning to pull away tons of funding from peacekeeping operations, they need to tell us to what extent this is actually changing if developing countries are going to add more money. Developing countries don't have tons of money just to add to peacekeeping out of nowhere. They have no contextualization on how they stop the collapse of missions. But the second they say that it takes too long for the peacekeepers to go in. But according to the UN in 2018, the reason is because they don't have a standing army. And they don't want to have a standing army because it costs way too much money, and countries don't want to send troops just to sit on the UN and not know they're actually in conflict. They don't change this, and no country will agree to this. Then, what's key here is a term, and it comes from Mukherjee 16, who explains that when India was on the Security Council in 2011 and 2012, they were anti the increasingly ambitious missions to use force under Chapter 7 of the UN mandates. This is going to be incredibly important because offensive operations are the only way for the UN to have peace. As Sarte 14 explains, that peacekeepers are increasingly deployed in areas where there is no peace to keep, which is why he concludes that they need offensive force. And specifically, Green 13 explains that peace enforcement missions decrease the probability of civil war continuation by 75%, which means on net, the good part of peacekeeping is going away when you affirm. Don't let them get away with the general 86% decrease in war. Let's go to their second argument, which discusses China. They say the U.S. won't intervene, but they give no analysis as to why India will intervene. The U.S. has way better allies in the Indian Ocean and South China Sea than India does in the status quo, and they're not intervening. Why would India? The first thing they say is that China will listen to mediation. As Danny explained in the first crosswalk, China has never listened to mediation. Most notably, new close topic, UN tribunal with Philippines. They don't listen to multilateral diplomacy or bilateral diplomacy. There's no precedent for this to be true. The second thing they say is that India would be an equalizer. But Zoo 18 explains that India does not want to get in the battle between the United States and China as per the South China Sea in this region because they don't want to contain China. The warrant comes from Davis 18, who explains that in the status quo, the U.S. factor is critical because if India is seen as more allied with the United States, it will decrease the probability of mutual learning between India and China. At the end of the day, India is already trying to increase military spending in the North Indian Ocean. You have no idea how they're preventing the conflict.
So I'm going to go down their case, and then I'm going to come back to my case. You all ready? This is going to start off straight on the first one. No good. Jackson good. Most importantly, Judge. On water wars, Pavar 16 gives 5 reasons India would never start it. First, in the event of a dispute, the World Bank would intervene to prevent a conflict. Second, geographical barriers prevent India from taking water out of current basins. Third, they lack the storage facilities necessary to divert water from the multiple rivers going into Pakistan. Fourth, it will risk their international reputation with other nations they have water treaties with. And fifth, China's threatened to divert water from India if they divert water from Pakistan. Thus, he concludes that though India and Pakistan have had 4 conventional wars, they've never used water as a weapon, but then turn it. Because of water leads to hydropower projects in Pakistan, but Ansar 14 finds that a single project increases Pakistan's debt by 23% because they use debt financing, but because debt holds back economies from healthy growth by redirecting more money to pay off debt and interest rates in the long term. Ayabu 12 explains that a $1 billion increase in debt servicing expenditures will actually reduce the growth of Pakistan's manufacturing sector by 6%, and Akron 11 concludes that doubling Pakistan's public debt reduces productivity growth 1.5%. Then, go to their second link about bailouts. Off the top, if Pakistan needs a bailout, it means their economy is not doing well, meaning winning a single piece of defense here shocks the entire contention. 4 responses here. First, Rwanda 18 explains that in the event that Pakistan tried to get an IMF loan, the U.S. would block it anyways. Literally, we called for their evidence. It talked about it down below. Second, Rwanda 17 finds that Pakistan is not even eligible for any of these IMF loans because their economy is already developing at a healthy pace. Third, Ohala 19 finds that Pakistan is not open to receiving any of these IMF loans, and Rwanda continues that many of the public politicians, many of the political party leaders in Pakistan don't want an IMF loan. And fourth, Turnit, Khalazad 11 explains that the real reason that IMF loans hurt Pakistan's economy is because it's a form of debt. They have to pay the money back in the long term, and thus Starklow concludes that it would kill 100,000 people. Then go to their third link about militarization. They fundamentally say that if Pakistan feels threatened by India or feel at a disadvantage, they're going to militarize. One, you can non-unique because Goshal 17 finds that Pakistan is already threatened by India because of issues regarding state-sponsored terrorism, the breaking of UN resolutions, and submersion, but if anything, turned the argument, because Cohen 95 writes that an Indian Security Council membership would actually act as an incentive and assurance for Pakistan and Kashmir groups, and Global Policy Forum 05 explains that an Indian Security Council seat would bring a peace process between India and Pakistan. But then they say they get scared when India becomes more powerful. You can non-unique that entire argument because India's economy is already growing incredibly fast. They're going to climb the global hierarchy that way. But then, at the bottom, 2 responses, or at the bottom when they talk about how tension hurts trade, that's not true. Bisky 18 finds that despite a history of tension between India and Pakistan, long-term trends do not show a decrease in trade, but rather steady growth. Then they make a really big mistake here. They read that there's a decrease in FDI, 3 turns. First, FDI shuts down local businesses. Baker 15 explains that the inflow of FDI causes prices to fall and discourages local entrepreneurs or businesses from entering the market. Baker concludes that a 10% increase in FDI inflow results in a 7% increase in failing domestic firms. Turn it again, it destroys economic stability. When countries depend on foreign capital, when their capital fluctuates or is withdrawn, the country's economy will suffer harmful repercussions, and it shows that FDI also increases economic volatility. This turns it in 2 ways. First, Law 18 quantifies that for every 1 standard deviation increase in FDI, income inequality increases 2.7%. Second, Nisha explains that every 10% increase in FDI increases poverty 4%. Then turn it again. Club 14 finds that FDI harms economic development in 2 ways. First, FDI undermines job development by ensuring that jobs are only granted to high-skilled individuals, keeping people in poverty. And second, FDI causes lax regulations and low wages, which undermine development. Now go over to our case. Here's the thing, when they talk about gridlock, that's actually not true, because when India was a non-permanent member, they only voted yes on 89% of resolutions and never voted no. They always abstained. There isn't gridlock. Then they say that they're going to act more like the P5, but they drop the evidence in case, which is that the P5 is not intentionally ignoring the developing world. They're unintentionally ignoring the developing world, which means A, our link goes clean conceded, but B, this actually frontlines the turn back at the bottom of back on response time, because if the rest of the P5 does not want India to pass what they supported when they were a non-permanent member, that means they're going to switch over to what they intentionally want and not propose problematic reforms, but they're going to switch over to what P5 does not intentionally want, which is reform, which is representation. Yeah, you can take the first question.
So the last thing you said to rebuttal is that the P5 are unintentionally ignoring the interests of the developed world, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so what does this look like, right? When India and all these developing countries are just like complaining again and again at the UN that we want more representation, what do you think they're unintentionally ignoring? They clearly hear it, right?
No. It's not necessarily that they ignore them, but they take harmful action and punitive measures like sanctions. What we tell you is that India reverses that.
Wait, what do you mean they take punitive measures? Like, what does that
Our link is not necessarily that they're ignored. Our link is that the UN doesn't know how to help them, and so the developing world feels like they're at a disadvantage. I got to be able to answer your first question, right? Because you also asked how India solves that, right?
Well, no.
Or do you not want to know my link?
I'm not asking about how India solves that, right? Like, I'm just trying to figure out what your link is, right? So you're saying
I can tell you.
So it has nothing to do with like other countries feeling like the UN is more legitimate. It's just that India will push for specific policies.
No. It is they feel like they're more legitimate.
But you just said they.
No, I explained to you why they feel like it isn't right now. You didn't let me explain why they feel like it will. So I'm going to actually do that. Okay. The reasoning is pretty simple. Because India, as a non-permanent member, pushed for reform to help the developing world, and they would bring in new views and attempt to help them. But even if they don't actually help them, you guys drop the evidence in case that the African Union wants them to have permanent membership.
So, okay. So the key, right, is it still... your argument is India will actually make policies that benefit the third world, right?
Well, more that they would block harmful policy. But that's not necessarily our argument.
So, what's going on with this argument?
Our argument is it's about a perception. If the UN appears to be more legitimate, countries will donate more.
Okay, so it's about the UN appearing more legitimate, right?
Yeah, that's my case.
Let's talk about the biggest, two of the biggest peacekeeping contributors, right? Pakistan, Indonesia. How would they feel if India got permanent?
No. They are not some of the biggest they're some of the biggest contributors in terms of troops.
Yeah.
Our argument is about money.
If you don't have troops, you can't go anywhere.
Well, yeah, but troops aren't going anywhere.
What do you mean they are going places?
No, they're not leaving. People aren't stopped donating troops. What's on the decline right now is money. They're different.
No. It's the same warrant as your case, right?
No, it's not.
They see it as more legitimate, so they donate more money. I'm saying that the troop contributing countries like Pakistan and Indonesia see it as less legitimate, so they donate less troops.
No. You have evidence that they see it as less legitimate. You don't have evidence that they would donate less troops.
Well,
because if that made sense, they would have already started. No, here's why that doesn't really make sense. Because India and Pakistan both donate a large amount of troops, which means that to some degree, one side views them as legitimate. If they're arch rivals and one side views the UN as legitimate, the other would view it as illegitimate, and they wouldn't be donating troops. If both donate high amounts of troops, your strength of link is really low.
They both see the UN as a credible place where they can have their interests protected.
Wait, if India views it as a credible... Wait, India doesn't view it as a credible place. India's entire story with the UN is the UN is not credible, let's fix it.
Okay, but
that's why we have the
question again is what is really the brink of this argument, right? You're saying
affirming.
Everyone hates the UN, right?
No. The brink is already passed. Spending for peacekeeping is going down 25% every year. You guys drop the inherency. Because troops isn't the same thing as spending. That's not our argument.
I think the move is to go for next section and then go for turns on their kids. What? Just go for the drawing and then turns on their kids. What? Ending appeasement and turns on their kids. India won't. They say India won't. The US will say India won't. We're not going to appease China. By their argument that it's increasing transparency right now. Yes. They say other people oppose just India. It's the first step. It does not make sense to inherently oppose a country that's more representative. It just does not make sense. Biggest thing is they talk about terms, you know what I mean? Literally, one PR for most of a second. They drop the evidence that peacekeeping missions are already failing right now because of spending. You know what I mean? They were talking about which is the more effective form of peacekeepers. But if peacekeepers don't exist in general because they don't have money, it doesn't matter about whether or not you have the mandates.
Offense on our case weighing in their case. We debt turns on our first two links, but their criminal defense kicks us out of it. Let's go to our third link where we're getting offense to give two main responses off the top. The first is that it's non-unique because India's gaining their economy and Pakistan already feels threatened. But we tell you that if they're on the council, it is a permanent thing. It's a permanent supremacy of India over Pakistan. But B, it's an international recognition that India is greater than Pakistan, which is not is not the consensus right now. But if they're on the council, it's an international recognition. Pakistan won't take that. The second response I tell you is that there's incentive for Pakistan to have a peace process. This is a peace process is forced by India, and if India, from a seat of supremacy, forces a peace process on Pakistan, Pakistan will not be interested. That's what happened in 1971, and that's why they increased and looked for nuclear deterrence in 1971. At that point, they read a bunch of terms about FDI, but let's do some evidence comparison here. Our evidence from the Gupta and Hussein are specific to Indo-Pakistan military tensions. There are about general tensions, not specific to the region at all. At that point, you can extend the idea that A, there's a terrible amount of debt that Pakistan is in, and B, no country is developed without FDI ever, which means that if they get this FDI, it'll be a good thing. At that point, you can extend the link pretty cleanly. It's not really contested that Pakistan is increasing their military budget they would increase their military budget because they see India as a threat, and the impact of that comes from Hussein, which tells you that a 1% increase in defense spending leads to a 58% decrease in poverty because you divert government resources and divert FDI and trade. The way here's clarity of impact because on their case, you have no idea where these peacekeeping missions are, how many troops are, or how much less money there are, when this is going to happen. On our case, the Patella evidence tells you that any external shock leads to millions of people in poverty in Pakistan. Our impact is much clearer. Let's go to their case. They drop the Vera analysis, which tells you that there will be a more democratic deficit because other countries oppose it, like Indonesia and Pakistan. The implication of this is on their first impact about peacekeepers, because India and Pakistan will A, give less peacekeepers, and B, give less money to peacekeepers because they see it as less legitimate. At that point, they drop the Mukherjee turn, which is clean offense, drop in second rebuttal, which tells you from the start, which tells you that India's anti-offensive peacekeeping, and that peacekeeping is very good because they're able to defend themselves and push out rebels. It leads to a 75% decrease in the probability of civil war. This is clean drop offense on their case. Don't let them respond to it. Second time.
Okay. We're going to take running prep time.
Initially, Indonesia and Pakistan would give less troops.
It's not that it would give less troops. It's an implication from the bar evidence. You want to see the bar evidence?
Does the bar evidence?
It doesn't talk about it.
Okay, then no.
Okay. Time will start now. Okay.
Americans, what do you want to do? This is really easy. Extend all the stuff here. Extend that the U.S. would already block it. That's really critical because that's going to collapse their economy. They themselves will be that impact. No, I know. But extend their own link here. Absent the IMF bailout, their economy is going to collapse. That non-unique is their third link. They themselves read that if they don't get a bailout. You know? And here, they're saying our evidence is more specific. Their evidence is not a meta-analysis of the impacts of FDI. You know? Our evidence is what says that FDI increases poverty and FDI shuts down poor businesses. Our evidence is more specific to the impacts of it. You know? Also, extend the fact that historically tensions have not impacted trade in the long term, since their impact is super short term. You know, in our case.
Okay.
No, on our case. They will extend 2 years. You know how to deal with it, right?
Okay. Stop time. That was 58 seconds.
An entire continent versus 2 countries.
So the order's going to be our contention 1, our contention 2, our contention 1, our first warrant, second warrant, and then on to their case. Is everyone ready? Time will begin now. Go to our contention 1, our first warrant. Go to our second warrant. Go to our second warrant. We explain uniting the UN. By the response in which they say there are 120 nations that have pledged to increase legitimacy to the UN. At that point, we non-unique our first warrant. Go to their response where they say that Pakistan, in turn, because they're angry that India got onto the UNSC, is going to cut their funding into peacekeeping. I would argue the opposite. I would argue because they want to be a member on the UNSC and because they want to have influence, they would in turn continue to increase peacekeeping to increase their influence. With that, go to our second warrant on China. They drop our ending appeasement link in which we explain to you that because India wants a seat in the of permanent membership in the Security Council, they are not escalating tactics with China right now. They are not going to war with them. But once we give them that permanent seat, that gets rid of that incentive and therefore increases their expansion policy towards China. This is really bad because right now China is increasing their military expansion in China. If we don't do anything, we A, risk expansion, and B, allow China to continue to militarily invade the regional actors which killed 50,000 people in Vietnam. This is a clear place you're going to be voting. They drop the warrant. You've got 100% probability. With that, go on to their case. Go on to their second warrant. Extend the fact, on their second warrant, extend the fact that lacking of an IMF F loan will collapse their entire economy. Then extend the fact that the United States will block any IMF loan that will happen. That means their economy is going to collapse, non-unique of everything. That triggers all of their impacts on their third warrant. But go to their third warrant. Extend the fact that India's economy is already growing extremely fast, which is going to scare Pakistan regardless of anything that happens. But second, extend the meta-analysis that Alec reads to you, that when looking at the long term, any tensions in the region have no impact on the economic growth of either countries. This is non-unique to their entire contention. But then, go into the returns that we read on FDI. All they say is that their evidence is more specific to India and Pakistan. But we give you better quality evidence at the point at which our evidence is a meta-analysis. Go to our first warrant on how we hurt small businesses. Because FDI hurts the overall quality of small businesses, we see a 7% increase in domestic firms failing. This hurts their economy and is a better link into their arguments that they get. With that, affirm.
So you say like tensions between India and Pakistan have no effect on their growth rates, right?
On long-term growth rates, yeah.
Okay, so tell me how much do India and Pakistan trade right now?
Why is it relevant?
I don't know the exact number.
Well, it's not much, right?
Yeah, it's $2 billion. And if they were like other neighbors in Southeast Asia, that number would, like the number is supposed to be around $35 billion. Like there's clearly an impact.
Wait. I don't remember any of this in any speech.
Yeah.
Because
That's the whole point of this include
like,
that.
essentially-
Less trade because of tension.
essentially what you're doing is
No, we're saying you shouldn't respond to it in grand cross.
No.
No, we said there was never any long-term implication, even if we buy the short-term implication, and now you're like whipping out some brand new
No,
front.
there's nothing. I'm just trying to get to the bottom of this, right? Because all you're doing is reading evidence.
Yeah, you were too late to get to the bottom of it. We read it in rebuttal.
It seems like you're just saying everything's late because you don't want to interact in the conversation.
I'd love to have a
We can have a
conversation after
conversation.
round, but you didn't respond to it in summary.
The Senate evidence is very clear that military tensions are bad. I'm just trying to get the warrant behind your evidence because you didn't
I
extend
mean, the
one,
warranting
you
is
never
pretty
read it.
simple. Tensions are short-term. Like the U.S. has been in the U.S. is here. Okay, Sandy, let me explain it really simply. The U.S. is in multiple wars in the Middle East. We're also helping fight a war in Crimea, right? What happens in all those times? There are little dips in trade, but we still have one of the highest growth rates. Same with China and same with India.
What are you talking about with that example?
Wait, your argument doesn't make sense.
Trade with
Short blips in
Crimea?
short blips in tension have never impacted trade in the long term.
So why are you just saying it's a short blip in tension?
We're saying that if
I'm saying
India
it's
sees if Pakistan sees an existential threat from a permanent seat, that is not a short blip in tension. That's a permanent increase in tension because Pakistan sees that permanently India is superior.
Wait, so they just continue to increase the amount they put in the military
Forever.
every year?
What do you mean?
They eventually run out of money, right? So do they just continuously put more money into their military every single year?
Well, how Pakistan works is that the military runs the government pretty much. So as long as they have money, they keep putting it in. And we tell you that even if they don't have enough money, they put in money.
Wait, so
Wait, okay,
why
so they're
have
going
if
all
it's-
in on their military
If
now.
it's run by the military,
Yeah.
why hasn't the military already put as much in there, considering that they're already scared of India?
Because they're not as scared of India as they would be if India was a
So
permanent.
how much
Okay.
is militarization increase? Because
Quantify that.
Wait, so let me just get to the bottom. Can I ask a question?
50% increase in poverty.
Okay, let me get to the bottom of this. So it's your point of argument that Pakistan isn't concerned at all of the point that India is becoming one of the fastest growing economies and becoming a world superpower, but the second they become a permanent seat, that's when it's all
I
done.
frontline that in two ways, which you dropped. A, it's a permanent seat, which means they're forever superior, but B, it's international recognition that India is better than Pakistan. India having a better economy does not mean that diplomatic and militarily they are better than Pakistan. Putting them on the Security Council is international recognition that everyone thinks, or not everyone, but the world thinks that India is better than Pakistan. Pakistan will not accept.
How does international recognition?
It's going to be RPA surveys. Right? They say in summary that, if they don't get a bailout, their economy will collapse. We say it's still a linear impact, right? If Pakistan spending more on military spending, they can't spend as much as government on other resources, which is why it's still a linear impact, even if their economy gets worse without bailout. This response doesn't matter. Let's go to our third link about incentivizing Pakistani militarization. He sent 3 responses. First, he says that our economy is growing. Getting fertilized 2 ways. A, he tells you it's a position of permanent supremacy in the international organization, which means that Pakistan still has to go after them. But B, it's also about international recognition. It's all countries in the world voting India on and saying India that you're way better than Pakistan, you're actually a global power. That's why our evidence from tells you that they're driven to subvert that rise. The Farouk evidence tells you that it's a strategic disadvantage they cannot concede. Their second response is that tensions have no effect on growth. No, our evidence says the opposite, and specifically Pakistan. It says that these military tensions have decreased rate of investment, which is hurting the Pakistani economy. And the warranty here is that when there's less tension, there's less investment, they can't spend on their homeland, and they don't give any warranting as to why their card is true, but let us bring one up in second final focus. Then he says that their evidence about FDI being bad is good, that this is a meta-analysis. Who cares if it's a meta-analysis talking about random countries in Africa, right? Our evidence is very specific to Pakistan and saying a 1% increase in defense spending increases poverty by 58% because Pakistan needs FDI and needs spending on government resources to the people in order to grow in the long term. This is most important because the weighing is clean drop on clarity of impact. You have no idea, especially when we apply to the China argument, on why China is suddenly going to stop doing everything they are in the Indian Ocean, how India is actually going to intervene. They don't even extend any warrants off this argument in their summary. So the easiest place to vote here is because you know that affirming condemns millions of Pakistanis to poverty. Let's go to their case. They tried to get out of the turns on their first contention. They failed to do so. Our Mukherjee evidence says separately, India's anti-offensive ambitious mandates under Chapter 7. The Green evidence tells you this is the only way to succeed when they're placed in conflict zones, and it decreases civil war termination by 75% because they can go after perpetrators. This outweighs their second contention if you buy the whole thing because they're only impacting to 50,000 lives. They themselves say in their case that UN peacekeeping operations are so important. On their second contention, they don't explain why India can check them, why China will listen, and why does this prevent war. China will continue doing whatever they want. They give no evidence saying that India will actually long-term be able to balance them. There's no clarity of that.
Their case, our case. And then at the end, I'm going to do weighing, refute their weighing, do my own weighing. Yeah, you got it. Okay. It's going to start on their second link. Everyone ready? They concede in final focus that since they lost a D-link to their second link, like the entirety of Pakistan's economy already collapses. All they say is it's a scalar impact, but A, they concede this, so immediately we're outweighing on strength of link. But second, it controls the internal link into their third link in two ways already. First, if the economy collapses, there isn't government revenue to put into social spending either way, so they drop the first point, they don't have a third link. And second, if the economy collapses, trade or investor certainty drops as well. There's no trade either way. When economies collapse, especially in an economy like Pakistan, nobody's going to want to trade there. I told you in rebuttal, if they lose their second link, they lose the rest of their case. This was unrefuted until final focus. Do not let them have a case at all. But now let's go to the third link either way. This is what's really critical. The responses that Danny made were in response to the first non-unique I made, talking about state-sponsored terrorism on behalf of India. The responses to India's economy did not come until final focus. What we tell you is that A, the economy is permanent as well, and the economy is something recognized by the international community. That's why everyone in the P5 has strong economies as well, and that the rise of India's economy makes them perceived by Pakistan as a hegemon. That is the warrant that Jackson extends on the perception of hegemony, and that should non-unique the entirety of their argument. There's way too much drop defense on their case to buy it. So at that point, let's go to our case. It's the only other thing in the round. The only thing that they extend in final focus is this argument about anti-offensive operations. Here's the problem with this. The only way that they do is on clarity of impact. They don't tell you where these offensive operations are. They don't tell you how many of them they have. They don't even tell you that they're in place. They don't tell you how many people they saved. They don't tell you that this is an all peacekeeping mission, and they don't extend an impact of how many people are actually saved. You literally can't vote on this 75% statistic if it's 75% of a tiny impact. At that point, go to appeasement. They drop the argument 100% and try to do some new weighing in final focus. What we tell you is that right now, India is appeasing China to get a permanent bid on the UNSC, but at fiat that, and they'll be ended. This is really critical because at that point, they then begin to expand and push against China in the Indian Ocean. They want to know why that matters. If they don't have the Indian Ocean, they fall, and they want to know how India does it. They do it by ending appeasement and checking back, and that saves 50,000 people due to Chinese expansionist policies. That is the most clear impact in today's round.